Emotional intelligence. It's a concept that's been around for quite a long time. You've heard about it, you've read about it, you may have studied it. But what about emotionally intelligent teams? It sounds good, but is it like a real thing? And what would an emotionally intelligent team look like? And does it make a difference in the bottom line of our businesses? We'll explore all of that and more starting right now. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could have joined us in the future live. It's too late for this one, but if you want to connect up with us, know when we're doing these live so you can take advantage of this information sooner and be more engaged. We do this on various social media platforms. You can find out when they're happening and how to involve yourself by going and joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, two of the platforms that these take place on. And you can do that by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. There it is. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a set of tools to create great results for their organizations and team members. That's what Flexible Leadership provides you. Learn more and order your copy now at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. Now I'm going to bring in my guest, which you've been waiting for. So you don't have to listen to me, but you can hear from her. Her name is Vanessa Druskat. She is an associate professor at the Peter T. Paul College of Business and Economics at the University of New Hampshire. As an internationally recognized leadership and team performance expert, she advises leaders and teams at over a dozen Fortune 500 and global Fortune 500 companies. Her best-selling Harvard Business Review article with Stephen B. Wolf on emotionally intelligent teams has been chosen 6 times for inclusion in collections of HBR's most valuable and valued articles. She's the recipient of multiple research and teaching awards, and she is the author of The Emotionally Intelligent Team, Building Collaborative Groups That Outperform the Rest. Vanessa, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Kevin. It is pure pleasure to be here with you today and your audience.
So let's start here. Let's start with, I'm guessing, now I know that you moved around a lot as a kid because I read that in the book. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get to that in a second. But I'm guessing when you were, 8, you probably didn't think, I'm going to be a professor and write books. So tell us just a little bit about the journey as it relates to how you end up here, writing this book and us having this conversation.
Sure. Well, when I was young, I was an athlete and had the opportunity to be in a lot of different teams. I also started work very young. I lived in a farming community, and I started working on farms at the age of 12. And I worked in teams on farms. So we would, pick asparagus or cucumbers or squash or whatever we were doing. And we worked together. We helped one another, and I looked forward, as much as the work was hard, I always looked forward to being with the people. But when I got to the workplace, it was a whole different story. People were competing with one another. I didn't feel like people were lifting me up anymore, supporting me. I felt like they were trying to trip me up, or just ignoring me, treating me like I was invisible. So I started to get interested in teams because I'd always loved them so much. And when I got to school, I have 3 degrees in psychology. In every one of those degrees, I focused on teams. But I was very disappointed with what I read. Everything about teams was about personalities and skills. And if you just had these interpersonal skills, everybody would be fine in the team. Or this, agreeable personalities, your conscientious personalities will make for a great team. Well, that wasn't my experience. My experience was that I would be more conscientious or more agreeable if I felt like the people around me were, and if we were lifting one another up. So I started thinking about my history, and I grew up in a family that moved a lot. And my father and my mother were both international teachers, international educators. And so we moved from culture to culture when I was a child. And I noticed that in every culture, you had to adapt your behavior to be a different person. So, one of the stories I talk about frequently is when we were in Kenya. I started school in Kenya and I won a road
You weren't
race.
picking asparagus in Kenya. I'm just saying.
No, I wasn't picking asparagus. I was picking that in Hadley, Massachusetts. Um, so in Kenya though, I was always competitive, and I loved to run. And I won this race. I started jumping up and down, and the headmaster came over and said, we don't celebrate like that. That's not how we do it here. And so I learned from a young age that you adapted your behavior in different environments. And I took that lens to the study of teams. And the first large study I did was in a manufacturing organization in North Carolina. And they had 300 teams. And I could literally go from team to team and see different mini cultures in every one of those teams. And really, this is the way we do it around here. And
Which is my definition of culture, by the way. The way we do things around here. That's my
the
definition.
way we do. Yes, thank you for that. It's hard for people to wrap their hands around it because they always think it's about the individuals. But every team has a different way of operating. So anyway, long story short, I got very interested in learning about what the very best teams did in their culture. And so I then took my research, got my PhD and this kind of stuff, had some phenomenal mentors, which I can tell you about that helped me with this. And I built a model of what the cultures look like in the tippity top teams in a lot of organizations. And the way I determined that was by studying the best, always the highest performers, and we would measure things, percentage of goal met, or however the organization measured performance. And then I would look at typical performers, like your average team. So teams that did fine but not great. And I said, what is it that the greats do that the averages don't do? And that is the core of my my model that I present in the book. We labeled it team emotional intelligence because when we dug into it, what we found is that what these great teams did was they met the needs of the individuals and the team. So they built trust, they built psychological safety, they built collaboration, and it was all about the routines and the habits and the ways the team worked together.
We're going to talk more about the model in a little bit, but I want to talk about a couple other things before we get there. So this phrase, emotional intelligence, like I said, been around a while, and popularized by the guy who wrote the foreword to your book, which is pretty darn cool. But my question is, and I sort of hinted at this in the open, like, what is the difference? Or like, how are they? Well, let me ask a different question first.
Mhm.
Are we just talking about culture? You and I have both used that word now. Is 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 this just another way to look at culture?
Well, I do think it's another way to look at culture. I mean, first of all, let me say we often talk about organizational culture, which is important, but every team has what sociologists call a local culture. And it's really that local culture. It's the way things happen in the people around you, the conversations, how we treat one another. Do we listen? Do we not listen? Do we acknowledge one another? That kind of thing. And so yeah, it's culture. But what I do is I share with leaders what goes on in the cultures of the greats. And it's not rocket science. Anyone can take this on. You know, it's really not rocket science. It's just that we don't usually do this because we don't teach leaders how to build culture.
Yeah. So you said that sociologists often call it local culture. We talk about macro culture and micro culture,
Sure. Great, great,
so
great.
which is exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And so it leads to a question that I'm sure you get asked all the time, which is because a lot of people are already listening to this and say, man, my CEO needs to read her book. Like they need to talk about this. Like that doesn't belong to me. It belongs to them. And I would say it belongs to all of you, including everyone, whether you're a leader or not. But like, what's your take on that? And what's your thought about that as it relates to the fact that the micro or local culture is connected to the bigger one, but it's not the same as. So what's the role of the leader in making all of this happen or moving the ball forward around it?
Sure. So let me just say this. In an ideal world, and this happens very infrequently, I get to start by working with the CEO's leadership team. And I have worked with some CEO leadership teams. And then we trickle down, right? But that's unusual. Typically, I get a call from someone who is having, you know, a leader who's self-aware enough to know that their team's not meeting their potential, or a leader who says, I've got problems. I don't know what's going on. So I come in at the middle of the organization. And I just want to say this. You have an outside culture, but you can adapt. You can create the culture that you want inside your team, and that is your responsibility. And let me say one more thing about this. There's a neuroscientist named Lisa Feldman Barrett at Northeastern University in Boston. And she says, the human superpower, what differentiates humans from other animals, is that we're not born with instincts. We're born social learners, and we learn the cultures that we're in. Boom, here's the superpower. We can build the culture that best meets our needs. We don't have to just take the culture we're in, we can adapt and create a new culture. And that's how you build an emotionally intelligent team if you don't already have one.
I love that. So before we get to the model and the clusters, I want to get there. But there's one other thing. Well, there's a couple other things. One is you say something early in the book that's, I think, worth you unpacking for us all.
Sure.
And you say that teams are systems. And
Yeah.
like everyone probably would say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But like, I think that you can give us a new and different perspective on that teams are systems. Tell me what you mean.
Yes. So let me boil this down to something that's easy to understand. Teams are about interactions. Any system is about interactions. So let's just talk about, I'm just going to compare for a moment. I don't want to bore your audience, but we can talk about the a motor, which is also a system, like a motor in your car.
Mhm.
And, it's all about the interactions, the pieces interacting that make the car run. Teams are human systems. And it's also all about the interaction. So you say something, I hear it, I react to that. We pass things back and forth. The leader says something, we all react to it. It's always about the interaction. But this is where I want to introduce the idea of emotions to you and your audience. Every interaction involves an exchange of emotion. So when I say something to Kevin and he reacts negatively to me about that, it affects every other interaction that goes on in the team. And so human systems are emotional systems. And so, if you will, let me just break out of that for a second. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything I say. What that means is that in that system, somewhere you need to tell me that you care about me and respect me, Kevin, so that I know I'm respected by you. And when you disagree with me, I'm like, okay, yeah, Kevin, we're friends. Boom, disagree with me all you want. And the interactions will continue to be effective and productive. What you don't want is a system where when you interact with me, it closes me down and then I don't speak again. Right. We have that kind of a conflict. And so emotionally intelligent teams build a core of meeting one another's social needs so that they can have disagreements, arguments, conflicts that end up being productive. I hope that's not too much all in one
No,
soundbite.
not at all. Uh, we got a question that I think is connected here, and if it'll pop up there, there it is. How can first principles help us in this regard? Do you have thoughts about that?
Oh, I'm not sure what you mean by first principles.
I'm not sure what he means either. So if he responds and helps us, we'll play with that a little bit more. But for now, I want to go on and have you talk about the model itself. Um, the model is a set of norms
Mhm.
uh, based in three. You call them clusters. So um, tell us a little bit more about those clusters and what we need to know about those.
You bet, you bet. So before I do that, I wanna come back to one thing about systems and why we need to think of it that way. Teamwork is all about the interactions among the people in the team. And I don't think that leaders realize that to build a good team, you have to build good routine interactions within the team. So when I talk about norms, I'm talking about routine habits, the ways we interact. For example, do people listen to one another when they're interacting, or are they on their computers? You know, that kind of thing. So anyway, I just want to make that clear first of all. Now, let me
Mhm.
get to the buckets of norms. So there's three, I call them buckets, I call them categories, but there's three main categories of norms that the great teams engage in. The first category we call helping one another succeed. This is the category about caring for the individuals in the team. So we've known for 75 years that if you don't take care of the individuals, they're going to create problems. And that's because teams are emotional systems. So if I don't get to know you and respect you, understand you, build a relationship with you, basically, I'm not going to be able to fully utilize your talent in the team. That's what the first bucket is about. And it is probably the most important bucket in the model because team leaders so often ignore it, but the great teams don't. So I can come back to that. I would like to be able to say more about that bucket because it's something that I don't think most leaders understand. They think it's a soft thing, and it's not. Second bucket is about how we interact when we're together. Do we talk about problems? Do we talk about solutions? Do we open up an analysis of how we're doing? Do we get all the brains in on the topic and all aligned? So there's a set of four norms in that second bucket that is about how we interact together, how we build, how we continually focus on improvement. So this is very tasky. And I just want to say that emotionally intelligent teams get the task done with flying colors. They are focused on the task. Because they bring all the individuals along, they do a really good job with it. Third bucket is about reaching outside of the team to get ideas and information and resources that are going to improve your process. So, if you will, the bucket number one and bucket number three serve bucket number two, which is about the task. All right.
Yep.
So let me stop there and ask for your follow-up, and I'll dive into any of those you want me to do.
Well, we could spend the rest of our time on on any of them, and I want to spend a little time on the last one before we're done. Um, I think people will probably guess the answer to this question, but we have to talk about it. Like where should we? I have a brand new team, right?
Yep.
One of a question just came in relates to this idea of I've got a new team. Where do I start?
Yes.
And even if and I think the answer is the same. Even if I have an existing team, where do I start? But where amongst all of this should
Mhm.
I begin if I'm the leader?
Yeah. Great. If you've got a new team, you're gold because let me just tell you that in the very first meeting of a team, norms begin to emerge. How we're going to do it around here starts to emerge. Typically, what happens is we look to the leader and the informal leaders, the people with status in the group, and we just follow what they do. There's often a little balking at that, but it's typically all the research shows that it's the informal leaders and the leader who define what the norms are, which is not a great way to go because those are basically
Unless you're
served.
really lucky, right?
Yes. So, what you want to do when you start off is come up with norms that serve everyone. Everyone in your team is going to have past experiences in teams. What happened in those best team experiences? I personally like to start with the model that we've got in the emotionally intelligent team in the book that we've been using for years, and I say here's a 9 norms that we know are best practice norms that great teams use. Which of these do you think we want to incorporate into our way of operating? So once the team selects the norms that it wants, you got to hold them to that. Lots of, kickoff for meetings. We launch the team by coming up with ground rules or norms, and then we forget them. We never do them again. And they don't really
Well, we
affect
have the
me.
same ones for every team, and they're on the wall in the conference room.
Yes, and they don't really get used. Okay. I'm talking about different kind of norms. I'm talking about norms that you're actually going to use because you will have a culture whether you like it or not, whether you control it or not. And whether that's a culture that produces high performance depends on the norms in the room. Depends on how people interact. Okay.
100%. I love, and I want to underline for everyone who's listening the point of Vanessa saying it's if we don't create them, they will create themselves, and so they belong to us. One of the reasons the ones on the wall don't work is they aren't ours. They're sterile. They didn't come through a conversation that we had
Yes.
that led us to mutual understanding.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. A mutual understanding is critical. And control is critical. So one of our social needs is to have a sense of control over what goes on in the team. Everyone really wants that sense of control, and when they don't feel that control, that's a lot of bad behavior comes about in teams because people feel like they have no control over what's going on. So anyway, yes, you want to give that to them. But what you want to do is develop a set of norms that you're going to keep for a month. You're going to hold people to that for a month. You've got permission as the leader to hold people to that. And then after a month, you evaluate. How's it going? What do we need to change? Okay. So that's what I do when I launch a team. And typically what happens is in a month, people say, hey, we're not really sticking to those norms, are we? What are we sticking to? That's where you evaluate what are we doing relative to what we want to do. And then you start rolling with the change in the team. When you're not launching a team, once again, what I advise is that you evaluate what your norms are. The book includes a really quick survey that you can use, just kind of look at what the norms are. We in the of the 9 norms that are these best practice that we know the great teams use, you can just assess where are we on each of these. It's a great conversation starter. And which of these do we want to incorporate? And so what I always do when I work with teams is we do a baseline assessment. What are our current norms? How are they working for you, folks? And you don't only listen to the leaders, the informal leaders and leaders, because they belong already. The norms work for them. What typically happens in your average team is that those folks participate a lot and everyone listens to them and they're afraid to disagree. Or it's just easier to go along to get along. Why make waves? You're going to make enemies, blah, blah, blah. But when we evaluate those norms, what we find is that there's a whole cadre of people for whom those norms are not serving them well. I'm not listened to. Whenever I talk, let me give you an example. I have a colleague who worked in a very prominent organization, and she was a relatively new team member. And the team leader used to take notes of what people were saying. But every time she talked, the leader would stop taking notes. What's the message there? Right? What you say just doesn't matter. It's circled into a whole bunch of frustration for her. Do you think she shared her best skills in that team? No. And the biggest difference between the high performers and the average performers is whether or not you're using all the skills and talents in the team. And so anyway, let me stop and let you see if you have a
I was going
follow-up.
to say that in that example that you just shared, the intention of that leader might not have been that at all, but that's the outcome.
No.
And that takes us to being emotionally intelligent ourselves,
Yes.
recognizing how what we're doing is showing up and the messages it's sending, intentional or not. Like that leader, it could have absolutely meant exactly how your colleague viewed it, and no disrespect that's how they viewed it. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what the leader intended.
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
solution could simply been someone else should be taking the darned notes, right?
Yes.
Like, right? It's
Yes.
as simple as that. So
But let me
I
stop
like to
you.
talk about those kinds of things because people go into
Yes.
blame and then we lose the lesson here.
Critical. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm glad you said I was going to stop you because I want to keep talking about this. These nonverbals are critical. So let's come back from the leader to the people and what we what's going on in the. So as soon as let's just say come back to my colleague, we'll call her Frances. Frances starts talking. Team member number 1 picks up their phone and says, Oh, Francis is talking. Now's the time to answer my texts. Okay. I got to tell you, Francis never misses that. No one ever misses those
No.
nonverbals. And or Francis will start or everybody else will start looking at their notes. Or we said this is where it comes to the norms in the team. Is the norm that we're going to listen to everyone? And the leader, this is the leaders holding the norms, leaders holding the culture. All right, we're all focusing on Francis and whoever's speaking at the time. So let me give you an example of a team that we worked with where that changed everything. It's a team of engineers, very masculine, all men, and they were performing poorly, very high level in the organization, but their let's call it a region was performing poorly. Their team leader got fired because of it. New team leader brings us in and says, how am I going to get these angry masculine engineers to start working together and focus on what we're doing? We bring them into the room. We measure their norms. They're not respecting one another. They're not treating one another well. So we talk to them about that. They decide that what they're going to do, and it was a joke when they started it, was that when everyone started talking, they would look at them in the eye and they would nod their head. Oh, Kevin, interesting, right? That small nonverbal behavior meant that people started talking more, sharing more. And when that person started sharing more ideas, someone else started sharing more ideas. The head nods continued. The nonverbals started the ball rolling. I got to tell you, they started helping one another because they were all leaders of their own areas and they needed help. Each one needed help. They started helping one another and the team just took off. And within 6 months, I mean, they also changed a couple of other things. They did some of the things that were in the middle bucket, which were really about, again, aligning one another and focusing on the task. But the nonverbals matter. We are wired to pay attention to those nonverbals. And if you're sending negative nonverbals to some people, you're closing down. You're not hearing from them. They're
especially if
closing.
you have especially if you have that title, even more so if you have the title, which most of you do here. Although everyone that's listening, recognize that. Don't just think about this for the team that you might be leading, but if you're a leader, unless it's a very small organization, you are also members of teams as well as the leader of a team. So both hats need to be considered and worn at all times. There's so many things, Vanessa, that we could talk about. We can't get to all the stuff I wanted to, but there's two things I do want to, maybe three that I want to talk about real quickly if we can. One is in the last bucket or cluster, you talk about team context and outside of the organization. Like you talk about how we interact and what's the connection to the world outside of our team.
Mhm.
I think that too often that really does get missed. And so talk about that just for a second, because I think it's really important stuff.
Sure. Yeah, this is work originally that was done by a woman at MIT called Deborah Ancona, or not called, that's her name, Deborah Ancona, professor, brilliant woman. Excuse me. Um, she rocked the team world when she said, a lot of the work that a team needs to do is reach outside. You need to send ambassadors out to talk to your clients or your customers, to talk to your boss's boss, to talk to creative people in other industries that are doing similar kind of work, and bring that information in. And that's going to make you high performing. So when I discovered the same thing, I remember bumping into her at a conference once, and she said, why isn't anyone else talking about this besides you and me? Because you want to have a creative team. You want to have a team that really meets your customers' needs or that is anticipating them before they occur, then you need to have ambassadors who go out and bring that information in. And I'll tell you, team members love this norm. They connect, they learn, everybody learns. You got to bring the information back and share it with the team when you're back in that middle bucket. Let me let you ask a
It's so
follow-up.
important having that
Yeah.
context. Otherwise, we all know the challenge of having blinders personally, and fundamentally, this is how we end up creating blinders for our teams, silos in our organization,
Yes.
sub sub optimizing everything You're down to it, right?
Mm.
So if people are listening to our conversation, and we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about groups, we're talking about emotionally intelligent teams, many people are asking this question that I will just now verbalize. How is this different in a post-COVID world? What would you say to those who are leading a hybrid or remote team, which fundamentally is many of us, right? Regardless of what popular press is saying. Um, what would be one or two quick things you would say for us to think about as this relates to when our team is not all together every day?
I'm going to say, before I give you the answer to that, I want to just say one other piece, that thing that we learned during the COVID pandemic, which was we really learned how much belonging mattered to people, how much respect, everything. So let me just define belonging for you, which is the need to feel known, valued, and mutually supported. So you got to think of your team as a container that's going to hold people with care in that container, care about them, give them feedback, because care about their development. So we really learned that when you're not doing that, people leave, or they say they're in, but they're really checked out. I gotta tell you, there's a lot of team members that I meet that are really checked out. All right, so let's talk about the remote and hybrid teams and what you do with that situation. Um, the biggest problem you have with that, and all the data is showing that you weaken relationships, you weaken collaboration, you weaken knowledge sharing. Okay, so you don't interact as often when you are psychologically distant from people. Turns out that when you're physically separated, you're psychologically more separated. And in fact, Kevin, if you were over in South Africa right now and I was in New Hampshire where I am, I would really feel psychologically different. I'd be a lot less likely to contact you. We got a time distance anyway, but just the psychological distance creates emotional separation. All right. So you got to overcome that.
So
You
leaders
do
have to
it
we have to consciously work to overcome that, because if we don't, it's
consciously. Bingo. Thank you for clarifying that. You have to be so much more intentional about the norms that you create and what you do, the routines that you create. So, for example, um, doing a check-in. I don't know whether or not I don't think we've talked about check-ins yet. I haven't really talked about how you get people in the room when you're having a meeting, but building that first norm of feeling need to be known. The great teams, I've never met a great team that doesn't do a check-in when it starts its meeting. And the check-in can be often in the great teams, it's about what's on your mind, what have you learned in the last week, what's keeping you up at night right now, what's happening in the team. You got 30 seconds, go. And you go around and you hear everyone in the room. All right. Well, when you're distant, that's even more important. Maybe you're going to make that check in 45 seconds rather than 30 seconds. But you need to know what's going on. Because that helps you feel like you belong. You peel the onion of who this person is. So now I know Kevin a little bit better. And everyone says, and in the research, it shows that that matters more. And you have the opportunity to learn more about one another when you're distant because you're more likely to ask questions.
let
So
me
what's
just
it
add
like?
that let me just add that that's true in your team meeting and also in your one-on-ones. And just like in the team meeting, that needs to be the first thing you do, needs to be the first thing you do in your one-on-ones as well, in my
Oh,
opinion.
absolutely. Thank you for
Um,
bringing that up. I'm sure it's in your awesome book, which I'm gonna get a copy of now that I've seen it. Um,
so I want to shift gears and talk about a couple things I like to always talk about with my guests. And the first is this: Vanessa, what do you do for fun?
Fun. I'm an outdoor person. I like to be outside, and I like to be with friends. So I live in this gorgeous state of New Hampshire, which is cold most of the time, but we have beautiful mountains. We're on the ocean. We have outdoor skiing and swimming and hiking, and that's what I do for fun. How about you? What do you do for fun, Kevin?
Well, I do all sorts. This is one of the things I do for fun.
Oh,
Having
good. Good.
conversations with really smart people. But we have something else in common, and that is that we have a farm background. I have picked the first time I picked cucumbers in a field, not like in a garden. In a field, I was 6.
Oh my
We
goodness.
need to have that
Oh,
conversation today. But anyway, let me ask you my other question. Looks like I froze there. I'm back. Let me ask you my other question. I want to ask before we go. Just 2 more things. Here's one. What are you reading these days?
Um, one of the books I'm reading, well, the book that I have open all the time is a book called Social by Matthew Lieberman. And he's a social neuroscientist at UCLA. And his research is on how we're wired to be social, and that so much of what we're wired to do is collaborate and cooperate, and how we get a high when we do that. We do it well. And so I just love to read all the nuances. I mean, I can't get enough. When I give presentations, I quote him constantly. The other book I'm reading, and I've got to grab the title of it because I got it right here. Both and Thinking. Wendy Smith is one of the authors, and it talks about paradoxes. And one of the things we've always known in about teamwork is that their teamwork is filled with paradoxes that can't be solved, which is you got to honor the individual and you got to honor the team. You honor the individual and the collective. And it can feel like a paradox. You mean you got to do both at the same time? Yes, it's a tension you always have to manage. And leaders are faced with a number of paradoxes like that. Oh, you got it. Brilliant. Look at that. Look at
Uh,
all the.
Both and Thinking by Wendy Smith and Marianne Lewis. They have been
Yeah.
on the show, and we will have
Oh, they have.
their nice.
Super.
It was right here. And if you're watching, you can see that I've been there. And they've been on the show. We'll put in the show notes their podcast as well.
Super. It's a
Fantastic.
great
So,
book for team leaders. It's a great book because there are some things that you just have to remember that it's a paradox, and you're going to have to do both and there's not one that's more important than the other.
and we're heading in the direction of the ideas in the book Flexible Leadership, as it turns out. But before we go, the thing you most wanted me to ask you, Vanessa, this entire conversation is, where can people find out more about the book? Where can they learn more about you? Where do you want to point people before we start to wrap up?
You bet. Best place to reach me is on my website. It's vanessadruskat.com. And I am going to be continually putting resources on that. So, for example, I have the quick survey that's in the book. I have a copy of that on the website that you're welcome to download, and some other resources. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have you copy me or contact with me on LinkedIn because I post a lot. I have and there's so many other great researchers out there whose work I want to share with you. You know, my mission has been to take what researchers know about teams and share it with the public, because people don't too often, academics don't get rewarded for doing that. And there's so much we know about research, including research on culture and teamwork and leadership, like your book, like the styles. I mean, you've got to adapt your style. We've known that for decades. Why aren't people doing that, right? We need to share that information, and I share that on my LinkedIn posts all the time. So please connect with me on LinkedIn and go to my website.
VanessaDruskat.com. Before we go, everyone, the question that I need to ask all of you who are watching or listening is this. It's the question I ask you every single episode. If you've been here before, if you followed along, you know that I'm about to ask you, now what? What are you going to do now? Now, obviously, we'd love for you to go buy a copy of Vanessa's book, but it's more than just that. Like, what ideas did you get today? Not intellectual ideas or insights, but what action will you take as a result of being here? Because it is that action that you take that will at the end of the day, make a difference. Otherwise, nothing's gonna change. And if you want to have a more emotionally intelligent team, if you want to be more collaborative, if you want to make a difference for your team, whether it's in your nonverbals or whatever it is, then you need to think about what action will you take, because without taking action, this will have been a far less valuable or useful use of your time, if you will. So I want to thank you again, Vanessa, for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you. I want to thank all of you who have joined us for joining us. And if you're with us for the first time, make sure it's not the last time. And the way to do that is to make sure that you subscribe wherever you are watching or consuming this content, to make sure that you're back next week, because next week we'll be back with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. My pleasure to be here with you and your audience.